The rabbit came out of nowhere. I pulled hard on the reins, and my horse nearly threw me sideways into the dirt. 3 days I'd been riding the canyon flats between Tucson and nowhere, and the only living thing I'd seen was that dumb rabbit, until I heard the sound. Not the rabbit, something else. A breath. Quick and shallow, the kind you make when you're trying very hard not to make any sound at all. I sat still in the saddle. Wind moved through the scrub. My horse, Cable, flicked one ear back toward a cluster of sandstone rocks about 40 yards off the trail, and I trusted that ear more than I trusted most men I'd known. I climbed down slow, no sudden movements, left my rifle on the saddle, and walked toward those rocks with my hands loose at my sides, because if whatever was hiding there had wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. She came into view one piece at a time, first a foot, brown, bare, bleeding at the heel, then a shin. Then all of her, curled behind the largest boulder, like she was trying to become part of it. Her knees pulled to her chest, her dark hair matted on one side with something I didn't want to identify too quickly. She was maybe 25, maybe younger. Her dress had once been the color of good red clay and was now the color of 3 hard days. Her eyes found mine and she did not move. She was deciding something. I could see it. The calculation behind the fear. Run or hold still, fight or disappear. I sat down on a rock across from her, just sat, pulled my hat off and set it on my knee. We stayed like that for what felt like 10 minutes. Then she said something in Apache I didn't catch, and when I didn't respond, she said it again, slower, watching my face for recognition. I caught one word, soldiers. The rest I was piecing together from her eyes and the dried blood, and the way her whole body was coiled like a spring that had been wound too long. I'm not with them, I said. Stupid thing to say, but it was true, so I said it. She didn't understand the words. She understood the tone, maybe. She uncurled just slightly, just enough. I reached into my coat and pulled out the piece of hardtack I'd been saving since morning and set it on the rock between us, then leaned back and looked at the sky like I had nowhere to be, which was more or less accurate. She watched the hardtack for a long moment. Then she reached out and took it. Her name, I eventually learned, was something I could not say correctly, no matter how many times she corrected me. So she finally looked at me with the particular expression of a woman who has decided to tolerate a fool and said, "Saya," just like that. Like she was giving me a shorter word for my own benefit. I told her my name was Caleb Doss, and she repeated it once, Celeb, and then did not say it again for 2 days. I didn't know what to do with her, and she didn't know what to do with me, and Cabell the horse seemed to find the whole arrangement perfectly sensible. We made camp that first night in a shallow draw where the wind couldn't find us. I built a fire small enough to not be seen from high ground. She sat across it from me, eating the rest of my jerked beef and my last biscuit without any particular guilt about it, and I thought she was right not to feel guilty. She looked like she hadn't eaten in longer than I'd gone without. I gave her my bedroll. She looked at it, then at me. "I'll sleep against Cabell," I said. "I've done it before. He's warmer than he looks." She didn't understand, but she took the bedroll. In the morning, she was gone. I sat up, and for a minute I just looked at the empty space where she'd been. The bedroll was folded. I'd never folded my own bedroll in my life. I sat there feeling something I couldn't name. Not quite loss. More like the particular loneliness of a door that had opened briefly and then shut again. Then I heard Cabell snort, and I looked up, and she was standing 20 feet away at the edge of the draw, looking out over the flat country to the east. Her hand was up, shading her eyes. She was watching the horizon. She was watching for them. I walked up and stood beside her and looked out too. Nothing moving, just heat beginning to rise off the ground and the pale color of morning sky. "Clear," I said. She glanced at me sideways. Something shifted in her face. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first small stone that trust is built on. She stayed. Not because I asked her to. I didn't ask her anything for 3 days. She stayed because she was deciding the same way she'd decided everything else, slowly and carefully, with her whole self. I learned things about her the way you learn a language. Not all at once, but piece by piece, from context, from watching what she did with her hands and where she looked when she thought I wasn't looking. Her people had been moved. Some had gone quietly, some hadn't. She hadn't. She'd run with a small group, and then the small group had scattered, and then she had been alone for 8 days before I found her behind that boulder. I learned this over a week of campfire gestures and her patient, exasperated corrections, and the occasional word we shared. She spoke a little Spanish, I spoke worse, and somewhere in the middle of bad Spanish and pointing at things, we built something that worked. She was sharp in ways that made me feel frequently like a very slow child. She could read the land the way I read a newspaper, faster and with better comprehension. She knew where water was before I saw any sign of it. She knew when weather was coming 2 hours before the clouds appeared. She knew, one evening, that someone was trailing us, and when I tried to disagree, she looked at me with the patience of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by the limitations of others. And she was right. 2 riders, bounty men, I figured, working off a description or a rumor. We cut west through rough country. Cabell didn't love but managed, and lost them in a canyon system where the rock absorbed hoofprints. That night she laughed for the first time. Quiet, quick, almost surprised at herself. I'd been trying to start a fire with damp wood and failing comprehensively, and she watched me struggle for a good 3 minutes before she moved me aside with one hand on my arm and had flame going in under 2 minutes. "Celebs," she said, not looking up from the fire, "just my name." But the way she said it held something new, something almost fond, in the way you might be fond of a dog that keeps bumping into walls, but keeps trying. I'll admit I didn't mind it. The town was called Marvell, which told you something about the ambitions of whoever named it, and something different about what it had actually become. I needed supplies. I was almost out of everything. She didn't want to go in. We had a conversation about this at the edge of town, mostly gestures, some Spanish, a lot of meaningful looks, and what I understood was that she knew exactly what happened to Apache women in towns like Marvell, with or without soldiers involved. She wasn't wrong. "Then you stay with Cabell," I said, "out of sight. I'll be back in an hour." She looked at me for a long moment, deciding again. Then she nodded. I was back in 40 minutes. She was exactly where I'd left her, sitting in the shade of a cottonwood, with Cabell's reins in her hands and her eyes on the road. I handed her the paper wrap package first. She looked at it, then at me. "Soap," I said. And I pulled out the other thing, a length of fabric, deep blue, the color of sky late in the evening. It was the nicest thing in the store, and it had cost me more than I'd planned. And I handed it to her, and immediately felt stupid about it. She took it, held it. She looked at the fabric, and she's looked at me, and I had no idea what she was thinking. "It's just fabric," I said. "You can do whatever you want with it. Make something. Or don't. It seemed like your color." She folded it carefully, like the bedroll that first morning, and tucked it into her pack without a word. We rode out of Marvell as the sun was starting its long drop toward the west. 3 weeks in, we'd cross into the territory south of the Gila, and the country was different, more sheltered, older somehow, like the land itself was tired and had decided to rest. We were making for a place I knew, a canyon with a spring and a cabin that belonged to a man named Ortiz who owed me a favor and asked no questions. She wore the blue fabric. She'd made it into something. I couldn't tell you how. I have no understanding of such things. But it was around her shoulders like a shawl, and it was the right choice, exactly the right choice. And every time I looked at her, I had to remind myself to look away again. That was the problem I'd been ignoring. I'd been very good at ignoring it. She caught me one evening, sitting by the fire instead of sleeping, staring at the flames and thinking the kind of thoughts a sensible man talks himself out of. She came and sat beside me, closer than she usually sat, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her arm near mine. "Celeb," she said. Yeah, she said something in Apache, long and careful, watching my face. I shook my head. I didn't have the words. She switched to Spanish, and it was still too fast, too much. And then she stopped and thought for a moment. And then she said something I understood all at once. "Puedo lavar tus pies, I can wash your feet." She paused, looking at me. "Puedo ser tu compañera, I can be your mate, your companion, your partner." She paused again, and her voice was different for the last part. Quieter, not uncertain, but something else. Something that was not at all like fear and was its own kind of courage. "Puedo darte hijos. I can give you offspring." The fire cracked. I looked at her. She was looking at the fire now, her jaw set, her hand still in her lap. I understood what this was. This was not desperation. This wasn't the plea of someone with no options. She was not bargaining. She was offering. From a position she decided was equal, on terms she decided were fair. The tears came then, one and then another, and she didn't wipe them. Didn't seem to know what to do with them. Like she'd been surprised by her own feeling. I'd been alone for 7 years. Not unhappy, exactly, but the kind of alone that becomes the shape of everything you do, the furniture you arrange your life around. I reached over slowly and covered her hands with mine. Just that. Both my hands over both her hands. "Saya," I said. She looked at me. "I don't need you to wash my feet," I said. She didn't understand the English, but she was watching my face. "And I don't need anything from you that isn't already given." I switched to what Spanish I had. "No necesito nada que no sé." I stopped. I didn't have the word. I tapped my chest instead. "Already here." She looked at my hand on her hands. Then she turned her hands over and held mine. We sat there a long time without speaking. The fire burned down, and neither of us moved to add wood. Ortiz's cabin was good, solid. The spring ran clean, and there were 2 rooms, and he'd left a stack of firewood and a sack of beans, and asked no questions, exactly as promised. We stayed 3 weeks. I taught her to play cards. She beat me at everything within 4 days and showed no mercy. She taught me to read the stars differently. Apache names for constellations I didn't know existed. The sky rearranged into stories I'd never heard. We fought once, badly, about something so stupid I can't even tell you what it was. And she walked out, and I sat in the dark feeling miserable for 2 hours. And then she came back and sat down, and we started over. There was an afternoon where I was patching Cable's harness, and she came and sat beside me, just to be there, not doing anything else. And I thought, I didn't know it could be like this. That simple. There was a morning where I woke up, and she was already awake, and she was wearing the blue shawl and looking out the window at the snow that had come overnight. And she turned when she heard me stir, and she smiled at me. Not the polite nothing smile, but a real one, the kind that changes a whole face. And I thought, I am going to remember this. I am going to remember this for the rest of my life. Spring came the way spring does in that country, all at once and serious about it. We needed to make a decision. She knew it, and I knew it, and we'd been not talking about it, the way you not talk about something that matters too much to say wrong. One evening I said, I know a valley, north of the Mogollon Rim. I've got a deed on 40 acres. I've never done anything with it because I never had a reason. She listened. It's a good place. Water, timber, far enough from everywhere that nobody cares what anybody's name is or where they came from. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, in Spanish slow enough for me to follow, "You want me to go there with you." "I want to go there with you," I said. There's a difference. She thought about that. "Por qué?" Why? I thought about the bedroll, folded. The fire started in 2 minutes, the stars renamed, the cards she won every time, the blue shawl, the hands turned over in mine. "Because the place has been waiting for the right person," I said. "And so have I." Her eyes went soft in a way I'd only seen a few times. She reached over and put her hand against my jaw, just her palm against my face, and she looked at me like she was memorizing something. Then she said, in English, the first full English sentence I ever heard her say, slow and careful and perfectly pronounced, "Then we go." We left at dawn. The country opened up ahead of us, wide and gold in the early light, the kind of morning that doesn't apologize for being beautiful. Cable moved steady beneath me. She rode beside me on the roan mare we'd traded for in Marvell, sitting straight, her hair loose, the blue shawl bright in the sun. She reached over at one point, without looking at me, and her hand found my arm and stayed there. I put my hand over hers. 40 acres north of the Mogollon Rim, a spring, a valley, a reason. We rode toward it together, and the light came up all around us, warm as anything I'd ever known.